So this is a meeting of the Finance, Taxation, and Assessment Committee. Present with me are our committee members, Mr. Robinson, Mr. O'Brien, Ms. Farrell. Also present is President Pro Tem, Mr. Conti. In the audience, we have Ms. Rizzo. And Mr. Igo. Would you like to join us? And Mr. Kimbrough? So we do encourage all council members to attend all of these meetings because everybody votes on the budget and the bonding ordinances. Michelle, do I have that? Is that going?
It's on.
All right. I just don't see any little cute dial there. So, on our agenda for tonight is the presentation of the debt report from our treasurer, which is a requirement before we consider any bonding ordinances. And since we have now moved up the bonding ordinance cycle, and the administration is asking, the treasurer is asking us to pass these before the end of the year, preferably with the budget. We will be also, we have introduced the bonding ordinances, and we will be taking those up consideration at the same time as we are discussing the departmental budgets. I want to note for the record that Councilwoman Fahey is also present. So, everybody's been provided with a copy of the debt report. You also have our debt policy was provided to people, and that I think is what is relevant to me turning it over to our treasurer, Mr. Shahinfar. I also want to note that our budget director, Mr. Wheeler, is here.
Terrific. You have the debt report in front of you. The first section is really total debt service and landfill debt to total general fund expenses. It's all laid out there along with kind of a history of what we have been borrowing for the last few years. As a way of, I guess, explanation, under the debt policy, landfill expenses are excluded from overall debt for the purposes of counting essentially the ratio of debt to general fund expenses. That's why it's pulled out like that. Overall, we'll go to the next page, which is the debt issued versus debt retired. It shows you and explains, we've retired more debt in the past few years than we've incurred, than we have issued. Bear in mind that the debt issued, is bond debt and not, that doesn't include the note debt, the band debt, or the capital leases, which we don't have any right now. But for the purposes of this, the short-term debt is not included as debt for in a whole bunch of different environs, I guess I would say, including our debt policy. But it just gives you an idea that we've actually been doing a very good job the last few years of paying off debt and not incurring as much.
So that chart, just for clarification, when you are talking about debt retired, that also does not include what has been paid down on bands.
It does include what's been paid down on bands.
So we don't include the bands for the purposes of what we've borrowed new, but we do include it for what we've paid off.
For the purpose of debt, because you're actually paying off potential debt before it becomes debt.
All right.
It's the way it is.
All right.
Yeah. The next chart, the pie chart, is for 2019 on page 4, and that's just general fund expenses compared to debt service. Again, we've had many discussions over the years. 10% is the ideal number that we'd like to get to for debt services compared to general fund expenses. We are slightly over that for this past year. However, for the purpose of our debt policy, when you take out the landfill debt, we're actually, if you go to the next page, well under that 10% number. We're down at about 7%. The reason for that is that landfill, borrowing from the landfill is also maintaining our revenue stream that comes from the landfill. Again, that's, we're in quite good shape, I think, overall, with our debt at this point.
How much of the landfill debt's going to be paid by 2026?
2026,
It's going to be paid before then.
It'll be
what
paid off
we
before then, but I think there'll be other expenses that probably will be added on to.
There's going to be additional
Yeah.
costs for closing.
Yeah.
that go into that. Yeah.
They'll end up being included in this, and I think the discussion that you and we will probably all have over the next few years would be whether or not we should include that landfill debt if the landfill is closing or not and bring in revenue
Since there's
anymore.
no
So,
revenue.
right. So that's the discussion for down the road, but at least for right now, 2020 is the last year of the big chunk of landfill debt to be paid off.
Just for further clarification, on page 85 of the budget, it shows that next year we would have, the next 2 years, we would, instead of having almost $6 million in landfill debt, we will have approximately $1 million in landfill debt. And then in 2023, we're looking at 100,000,
Which also corresponds with a large drop.
What page is that?
85 of the budget, which is essentially the same chart as page 6 of the debt report.
No, that's true. Could have just referred people to that.
The big takeaway, I think, is that with the landfill debt coming off the books, our debt that we owe currently kind of drops off fairly precipitously. The numbers here reflect the streetlight bond debt, which we incurred this year, about $2.2 million per year. That's
When you say the numbers here, in particular on page 6 of your debt report, the $20 million that we have there does include
For-
the streetlight.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. So we still have a relatively high number in debt service for next year. The streetlight bonding, boosted that number up. But even with that, if you take out the landfill debt, we're still at right around 10%, I think, for debt for next year compared to expenses. It'll be, I don't know, probably 13%, maybe 14% if you include the landfill expenses. But, for the purposes, part of the problem here, I think, is the significance of that figure. I think for the purposes of, and I emailed this out to everybody, which is the fiscal stress report from the New York State Comptroller's Office. The good news, as I pointed out, is that our fiscal stress rating has gone down another notch. We were in significant fiscal stress 2 years ago, moderate fiscal stress last year, and I should say the year before. And for 2018, which is what the numbers are based on, we're only susceptible to fiscal stress. So that is a good move in the right direction. But the 10% number is a relatively small component of fiscal stress under this. Outside of this, it doesn't necessarily, the 10% figure doesn't necessarily have a large effect outside of, good policy, the stress report. If the bond markets if we were incurring debt that was not backed up by revenues or cost savings, the bond markets would probably look unfavorably on that, because we start getting to a point where you have more debt than they'd like to see. Knowing that the debt that we have minus the landfill debt at this point is, when you subtract that out, that is a positive effect from the bond market. So they see us in a positive light.
With the streetlight bonding, we bonded for what, 27 million?
26.
26 million. But we haven't spent it all, right?
No.
We incrementally spend it. And do we get interest?
Yes.
Does it match the interest we pay?
I don't know. I don't know the arbitration regulations from the IRS. We have an arbitration consultant that comes in to make sure that we don't run afoul of them. In the past, the city had earned too much interest on bonds on bond revenue that it had held, to the point where the city had incurred a penalty. And I don't know. I've heard this. I don't know it for a fact, but I think it happened about 15 years ago or so, which is one of the reasons why we got the arbitration consultant to come in and look at it. I don't believe.
Can it earn at least as much interest?
That would be the limit. That would be the limit, but I don't think you can even get up that high. I'm not entirely 100% sure myself, but it's something that we keep an eye on to make sure we don't run afoul. The only reason why we don't is because of the IRS rules. So then we run penalties. I would love to, from a revenue standpoint, hey, borrow as much money as you can and make some more money off it elsewhere. Yeah, obviously, the laws work to make sure that municipalities don't do that, because that is not a good sound fiscal policy. So, again, so I think we're within the we're quite concurrent, I think, with the debt policy for 2020. 2021, the debt starts to drop precipitously over that time period, and going forward, you can see the fall off right here. It's somewhat illusory because we do have an outstanding ban, of which 28 million we'll have to decide next year what to do with, if we roll it over into another bond anticipation note, or we take that plus the bond, the capital plan for this year, I should say for 2020, and borrow all that in a bond. I think we're going to see how the bond markets and interest rates go, and also work with the administration to make sure that we, have a good handle on what the money is going to be used for which project, and that we, are confident that, the vast majority, if not all of it's going to be expended. We also, in the paragraph below the chart here, explains that a little bit. I'll go, let's see. So it's about a total of about, I think, $47 million. It's a rough estimate at this point of what's outstanding in the ban, what is in the capital plan for 2020, and also includes the outstanding bond authorizations, the net bond authorizations that are not backed up by revenue reimbursement from the state or other authorities. So, and then, that also doesn't count, we borrowed $26 million on the street lights. It seems that may be more than we may end up using, I think, but we'll see how that project goes along in the next several months. So we may have extra.
So we bonded before we got the state money? For the street lights?
Yeah, we have to do that, yeah.
Okay. So, but then that wasn't figured in when we bonded?
I don't know if is there reimbursement? I can't remember if there's reimbursement on the streetlight bonds.
There's only a small
Yeah.
amount that is associated with the nodes, the smart nodes
Yeah.
on it. So
I think
We're
that's
not-
relatively small. It's more the other projects, like especially the street projects and the road projects, that's where a lot of
Then
reimbursement.
how much did we get from the state for lights? It was 2 million or something, wasn't it?
I don't think, I think that's what we're,
I thought it was more like $500,000.
Yeah, the only thing we're getting back from the state is a grant, I think for 600, I think it's, hang on, I have it here. There's a grant coming in for 2020. Put those somewhere, there it is. For $658,640 is the only reimbursement. Otherwise, it is funded by the bonds and then, but paid off, but the bond is being paid off
And that was
with the
That was
savings.
from the power authority and the survey?
It was from NYSERDA. Yep.
So there's a, when it comes to streetlights, we had this press conference and they're talking about them, helping fund our project, but what normally happens is things are financed through NYSERDA, and we opted, because we didn't want their variable interest rate, we opted to go with a 15-year bond ourselves. So
Yeah,
the reality is NYSERDA
I'm gonna hire
has
you as
done
my
very
spokesperson.
little for us.
Correct.
They've gladly taken our money for the project, for managing the project.
Like in Schenectady and Syracuse, they basically got grant just to pay for the LED lights.
I don't know, yeah.
I don't want to get tied up in that.
Well, it's okay. So the only, I think, other thing that I bring to your attention that's also in the report is that if you look at, when you take into account perhaps the maximum borrowing that we would do next year if we bonded everything, the question then is, how would that affect the outstanding debt service schedule going forward? And it's a little bit difficult to say at this point because we don't know where interest rates are. We don't know exactly how much we're going to end up borrowing up that $47 million, whether or not we're going to ban, whether or not we're going to bond. That being said, I think just as a rough estimate for everyone here, if you assume somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10 to 15-year bonding all of the debt that we have, that we're talking about here, the band debt, the capital plan for next year, and any outstanding. Roughly in the neighborhood of $4 to $6 million will be added yearly for the next several years. If it's a 10-year bond issuance, it would be roughly $6 million a year. If it's a 15-year bond, it would be roughly $4 million a year. So that can give you a rough idea of what you're looking at here in adding to this column for whatever it is that you put forth this year in the capital plan. But that gives you an idea. It's roughly 100. I put another figure in here for your information mostly, in that generally speaking, $1 million of bonded debt in 2020 would be expected to result in $80,000 to $120,000 in additional annual debt payments over a 10 to 15-year time period.
Let's make it easy. The average of that is $100,000. So basically, that anticipates that everything we bond for is essentially the equivalent of a 10-year period of probable usefulness or payoff period of 10 years. And
The
that
10-year,
does not take into consideration the little tweak for some interest, and interest rates are low enough that we're talking relatively, small amount at that point.
100,000, give or take 20.
So the 15 million that is now, it's a little over 15 million that is now in the budget for bonding for this year would be about the equivalent of another $1.5 million a year in our budget. That's a little bit of a fiction because...
And to be clear, starting 2021 going forward, not 2020, 21.
Well, right, yeah, and,
It's starting in 2021 going forward, not 2020.
right.
If we bond the debt next year, the
So we're
first debt
locked
service payment is
in.
not for the next.
Essentially in the budget with what our debt service is, and that is the 20.1 million for the bonds, the 3.14 million for the bands payments, and then we have some other debt that is $381,000. By my calculations, that does not trip the lever, and that was one of our goals in doing some conservative budgeting last year with some of the capital and not budgeting everything that was requested. So we're right under the cap, essentially. And because we're going to have a $6 million drop-off next year, we should be fairly comfortable, and I don't want anybody out there getting any ideas. So it is then cumulatively, after the $6 million drop-off next year, then you're looking at, if you keep on adding $15 million in borrowing every single year after that, where we don't have as much of a drop-off, so we don't have as much of, then we start needing to be concerned with what whether we might be up against our debt policy limit as currently framed. And I say as currently framed because some people will debate whether or not, because there's savings on the streetlight project compared to what we were spending previously on this, whether we then use that to deduct in the same way we do the landfill. I think that we're in a position that, we're looking a couple of years down the road before we seriously have to have that debate, any further, I think.
I have a question. Is there a goal to get our debt under a certain percentage instead of maintaining a certain percentage? Is there any plans?
There really isn't a policy, a best practice on that, other than the 10% level. I think anything getting it below that is really up to, council working with the administration, if that's something that we felt was necessary for us. I think discussion of that would really entail a lot of other factors that go into it, rather than just trying to, we have to get our debt down to this rate. But there isn't a policy or plan that I'm aware of in place. So,
If we got per capita A, just compare that chart up a little bit, maybe we could do a little more, and lower, so the town is still like $12.5 million. How do you overcome that?
So I just want to say something about that question. Generally, it is, recommended that you not stay up against your debt limit, and that while most municipalities and government have a debt limit of about 10%, many are well under that and aim for much lower. New York City is around 6 or 7%, for example. And it's just like your student loan debt or your car debt or your mortgage debt, that there's cost-benefit analysis that you need to do as to whether or not you want to be making that investment, whether it's appropriate to then also be, I want to say burdening, but sharing that cost with people in the future, since they also benefit from things like, if we were to, put $10 million in roads right now, of course, it's appropriate to have people in the future also be paying for that debt. Whereas, something like, the police cars, or, we've had the conversation about turnout gear, things for which there is a high depreciation rate on it that you wouldn't necessarily want to burden people. The other issue is right now we're benefiting from lower interest rates. And I think, you always have to watch for, is it going to stay low? If you have interest rates approximating zero, then there's no real cost associated with spreading the cost out over years, other than you don't want to then all of a sudden be caught by surprise. Oh my God, we have to bond for all of this at a much higher rate. We don't want to be at 10 bonding when it hits 10% on it.
To the point where you might even consider accelerating the capital plan for next year into the bond issuance for this year. If you know you're going to expend, if you know you're going to borrow money and you need something for new fire trucks, whatever, more roads, new roads, what have you. If you think the interest rates are that advantageous, nothing stops you from going back to the table and saying, let's move the 2022 capital plan up to 2021. So, not that I would necessarily recommend that, but
Trump is basically saying, we got 0%. He wants to have interest rates be at 0%. So we could go lower.
I just add a couple of things to that. There is not a hard cap. I think to call the debt policy a cap is not entirely accurate. It's a policy that can or cannot be adhered to depending on all of you and us. Every bond authorization that's passed by the council with 10 votes is compliant with the debt policy, whether or not you go above or below the 10%. The only hard cap we have is the constitutional debt limit that we have in the city, and we're well under that. And there's a figure, I think it's $237 million, if memory serves, of incurred debt. But we're way under those numbers.
Also, I'd like to point out, and I know for the purposes of the debt policy, I agree that we don't have to look at street lighting now, but it should be in the framework of our debt in its entirety, that we are still at our 10% level, but there is $2 million, $2.1 million in that is being fully funded by the savings from streetlights. Not just the debt payment itself, but the maintenance costs, the loss of the tax base for those ownership of the poles. And on top of that, we're seeing between $1 million and $1.5 million of a net savings above that every year. So really, I know we don't want to get into the argument necessarily about the debt service policy, but in practicality, that particular debt is being paid for by the ownership of the lights. And when you look at that compared to our 10%, I think that's a pretty healthy number that we're at.
But at this point, it's really a moot point because regardless of one way or the other, we're still where we want to be.
I want to know for the record, I'm sorry, that Councilmember Arnani is here. Did I mention Ms. Fay?
Yes, you did.
And Mr. Hoey? And
Dorsey.
Ms. Pliers, our committee member. And I did get Mr. Kimbrough earlier.
Yes.
All right.
Quick question for
Wait, I'm sorry. Dorsey has had her hand up quite a bit longer.
Thank you. Thank you, Darius. Page 3 of the handout that you provided, and I apologize for the late, and I'm missing the point here, and it's here. So essentially, let's see, it's the paragraph under the figure here. So I want to make something clear. You're saying in 5 years, the city has paid down $103 million in debt and only issued roughly $60 million in new bonded debt.
Correct.
And then when you take into account the streetlight debt, it's paying for itself. So if you take that into account, we're talking about only roughly $34 million.
Yeah. That's actual bonded debt, and that doesn't include the outstanding ban we have right now, which is $28 million.
28 million needs to be added to the 60.
Needs to be added to the 60. Does the 26 million you have referenced here take into account interest, or would it?
It does not, not for, let's see, that does not take into account interest right now.
Should it, or?
Eventually, yeah, it would be. This is for the time period that's at issue here. So if you do a larger calculation, yes, it would include the interest, which is about $6.7 million over the life of the bond.
Okay, and then pre the 5-year period, what was the rate of issuing new bond debt
For when?
prior to the 5-year period?
Prior to 2015?
Yes.
Around then, it was low, between 1% and 2%, I believe. It wasn't until I think it was 2012, 13 when the interest rates were a little bit higher. I'd have to go back and check, but I don't think we have any outstanding debt for the city that is paying more than 4.25%. So most of it's 3 or under right now.
Any other questions from committee members? Mr. O'Brien?
Approximately how much did we lose in tax on National Grid streetlights? Because still, National Grid owns the poles, owns the substations, so I assume we're still getting a healthy amount of tax from National Grid.
On average, here you go. I don't know if you have this copy or not. On average, looks like it does appreciate
You just gave
over
him
time.
something. Do you have other
I have copies for everyone.
All right, then let's pass that out.
I'm going to pass that down.
Do you have one for Michelle?
I do. I think I brought like 20.
All right.
Actually, just take the whole pack down, that'd be great. So if you, in the real property taxes to the city, this is just for the 15-year life of the bond. It obviously goes out, to full ownership. That gives you your loss of taxes, of real property taxes to the city each year. And that is accounted for into our net savings formula.
Any other questions from committee members? I do have a couple myself on the report. I want to, what?
Yeah, I did have one.
Okay.
The 1.8 million that's supposed to be transferred to
Debt service?
paying the debt service, how does that factor in?
I was gonna explain that once Darius is, and, we can do it now, we can do it whenever. So I have handouts for that as well. The first thing I want to introduce, though.
Actually,
you
you
want
know
to wait
what?
till we do it?
Yeah,
afterwards?
I feel like we're going to begin to mix apples and oranges here. I want to deal with the debt report. and then we can discuss, and it really should have been on the agenda, I guess. I didn't know that, anyway. So let me just ask a couple quick questions about the debt report. For one, the 2019 information was provided from the 2019 budget. It wasn't the 2020 budget, I take it. That's correct?
2019 information provided for the 2019 budget.
Okay. And so that was one of the things that normally you would have for us on page 2, you would have what is projected for the current fiscal year in which we're considering bonds for.
Okay.
Is that something you can provide to us? Can you modify this?
For you, what you want the general fund, as is presented right now?
Yeah.
The budget is presented right now?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you can take the figure from there and you know, put it against the
Right.
figure here.
I'm just noting that we're just a little out of sync. You got the debt service schedule in here that includes 2020, but that does not include, some of these charts don't include 2020, and I was wondering, I think that would be,
Let me take off 15, because I don't think I can fit it here.
right, yep. Yeah,
All right.
I think so. Let me see, what would be interest? No. So I guess I want to also say that last year you did, and I do think it is good for us to have, you did provide projections based upon what you anticipate will be borrowed. So taking us out, the OSC recommends that any purchases that are requested, actually, we see the budget impact of that. Now, we've got bond ordinances that are a little bit different than the budget book. I'd be looking for you to use what's in the budget book for actual purchases and anticipated timeframes. And you can pick an interest rate that goes along with that. And I think that when you're working on those assumptions, so we're talking about, the assumption is sooner or later you got a bond, that 28 million, or a significant portion of it, because a lot of it is for things that have a period of probable usefulness of 10 years or more. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get to that point. So I think for the purposes of taking a snapshot and have us have an idea of what the potential impact is, with the understanding that you may look at an option that is less costly to the city, but that is a very possible scenario, is to have the bands converted to bonds along with the 15.25 million in the budget for bonding, a projection for that on whatever interest rate that you would think is appropriate. And then we can see how that goes in the chart in the out years also that we want to be looking at. So you did that for us last year. Initially you didn't want to, but
Well, last year, I think there was for the bond issuance for the streetlights? Was that the one?
well, no, you actually did it for both. For where do I have that?
You want me to assume essentially full borrowing on the 47 million?
Except for I would keep out the 3 million extra that we don't really think we're going to use on the streetlights.
I don't
Okay.
think
All right.
we are going to use that for streetlights. Right now, the projections are coming in low.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned we overborrowed for that, but
Well, at least we borrowed less than 29.
yeah, listen to me to some extent.
So,
Yeah,
We're trying to get all this bonding done early this year, just to keep it focused while we're working on the budget, number one, right?
Yeah, I think from a use of time standpoint, that's the reason why we're doing it right now as opposed to in December or January.
Plus, it looks like the rates are gonna stay low.
At this
We
point, we
aren't
would think so,
sure
but we're
about-
not gonna be going to market until March, so, so I don't really know at this
That's
point.
when we
And that's,
know.
that's part of the problem is that it's so far out, and at least if you know we're gonna not use the $3 million here, that gives some direction, but.
That's what you provided us last year. I knew I had it.
Okay.
And that's an extra copy you can have. So that does include, the hypothesis, and I think that was very helpful. And I think just as, an exercise in making sure that we know what we are,
Yeah,
what we are looking at.
the
and-
difference between then and now is the interest rates here, so, that's only, it's
Well, the interest rates, but I want you to add in the
the
15 point.
speculativeness of the interest rates at this point, that's the thing. But,
Yeah. Well, also, I think that the number that you used there was the full 29 for the streetlights. You might want to take a look at that. And you now have, that was
which number?
for the.
47 million for the current capital plans? Oh, in there? In that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I did use the 29 million there,
Yeah.
right.
And now you have actual interest rate that's a little bit lower, too. All right, so those are my questions on the debt report.
The last thing is just the last paragraph, bond ratings, A+, stable outlook, fund balance has increased, and fiscal stress score has been reduced. All, positive trends that we expect will accrue beneficially when we go out to market the bonds in March, or bands in March, as the case may be.
All right, is there anybody in the audience that would like to comment? All right,
I have one question.
yes.
Is there anticipation that it's going to be a grant as a borrowing for revenues before the end of the year?
Not at this point.
I thought it said it's $10 million.
That's put in there so for transparency and disclosure purposes, so that it's a possibility. I point out in the report that we have not issued one since 2015. Don't believe we're going to have to this year, and you can take that out of the debt calculations. But it's there for just so everyone knows it's a possibility.
Oh, we got copies of that. This is also yours. All right. So, any other questions before we move on to what I'd like to be clear about what topic you're going.
I just wanted to come in to clear up if there's any confusion about the $1.8 million from our debt reserve fund that we're using towards paying down our overall debt. And I mean, I know the fire department is behind us, so since this wasn't on the agenda, is this something you want me to try to explain at a different time or in a different setting, or do you want to get into this now?
Let me ask the treasurer something. You provided us with these debt payment schedules.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to be paying out on our debt $23.2 million in 2020.
It may be less, but yes.
Right. So my only issue is you put in the budget that our debt service is something less, 21 million, something.
I think this is going to be the
It's a
one,
net.
this is what it looks like inside and in the actual account at the transaction level within the ERP system. We could
You
note.
can hand that
Yeah,
out to
yeah.
everybody. I
We could-
don't-
We could put a note or an asterisk with that debt service number and then display this breakout within the context of the budget, so it's clear if that's what you'd like to do. To me, that it makes sense, because
Wait. So are you talking about changing this to 23 million?
no, if we were to do that, see, here's the problem. If everyone looks at the second page that's on here, historically in the past, we've been applying between a $1.5 and a $1 million debt reserve payment each year. What we've traditionally done is budget $1 million on the revenue side and keep that debt service number full, which Judy's talking about is that entire amount. What happens at the end of the year, when we get our end of the year financials, is we look at this and see, well, how come we have $1 million variance in our revenue? Because the payment does not go through the revenue account, so you always have that variance. Okay, well, how come we have $1 million variance in our actual debt service paid to what we budgeted? Because that's where we're applying that $1 million payment. What we're doing now is not budgeting on the revenue side where nothing comes through and we have a variance, applying it to the expense side for when the payment is made, it matches what the budgeted number is, and there's no it eliminates the variance. But I agree, because it is different. I think that a good option would be to show the full value minus that debt service payment in some sort of add-in in that section of the budget.
So what we have in the budget and the way we've been treating the debt service, I mean,
It's
the debt
the way-
service, the debt service is what you pay out and what you are paying to our bondholders in the way of principal and interest. And I mean, I'm not making that up. That's like, I don't know, finance
right,
101.
and we still,
From a budgetary
and we,
general fund standpoint, that's the figure that we.
right,
pay out.
from the operating
budget.
funds, this is the
Right.
the net is the number that we pay out of our operating funds. Which is why if we have the full number in with that payment, it does reflect what the full debt is. But it shows that this payment is not coming from operating funds, it's coming from a separate restricted fund. And then we don't have the variances on each side of the budget.
Have you run this by the Office of the State Controller?
I have not,
It's,
but I did run it past the treasurer and Ken, and agreed that this is a better way, this is an appropriate and better way to show it within the context of the budget. Otherwise, we'd be inflating our budget by $1.8 million unnecessarily.
Well, except for,
What's
yep.
the I'm trying to understand, what's the downside, what are you seeing as the downside of the switch from the revenue to the expense side?
Well, I want to make sure that we are following good accounting practices, and when you and I look at the budget, as we have done in years past, and we look at the total that is there for debt service on page 10, that is being paid off, and it's different than what is in the schedule. So it's listed as 21.8 million, but actually the debt service is 23.2 million. You should be able to figure out what's going on. Are we paying less in our debt service? So that's open and transparent. That's number one. Number two, this is being done under the radar, without this being highlighted. And what we have then, because we are now changing from the way we did things last year to this year, if we did things the way we did last year, we would have a 2.18% increase in the budget, not a 1.25. I'm a little bit concerned that this change is being done solely to keep the narrative that we'll only have a 1.25 increase in the budget. So that's a concern in terms of being open and transparent about what's going on here.
But if he is willing to highlight it and put it in there, and there's an explanation in it for it, it makes it transparent, right? And you can put it into your final adopted budget, and that'd be.
yep.
So I'd like to see what you're proposing, and then I will be talking to other people about it, including, I think, the OSCs. It's appropriate for us to be asking that question about that.
And we don't have an issue with going back if that's the case. It's just from a budgetary perspective,
This is an accounting issue, this is a budget issue.
matching our budgeted numbers to our actual numbers is the goal.
Right.
And by putting $1.8 million on the revenue side and showing the full debt on the expense side creates a variance on both sides. This creates no
However,
variance on both sides, on
That
either
has been
side.
the way it's been done for 10 years? Beyond that? I mean, certainly from the time I've been paying any attention to city budgets, we've been doing it the other way. So, so I think that, in terms of, how we handle that, I'd like to see your proposal, and then it'll be a topic for discussion for the committee.
And you will be going to
Mr.
OSC.
Robinson, did you get your question answered?
No. I think, do we earn interest on that 1.8 million by being in the reserve?
That's how the reserve fund grows, is by the interest that's earned on the bonds.
Okay. And is more interest being earned in that account than what we are paying in debt service or for the bonds? The average?
Let's see, once it rolls to the debt service account, it's a separate issue. I have to check to see. It would still earn interest, yes. I don't know if the arbitrage rules affect the debt service account as opposed to the capital accounts. I have to check that.
So I've noted that there's a couple other issues with the budget, a lot having to do with the capital plan, but you've now provided us with a revised page 8, which changed the amount of the real property tax, which is now inconsistent with what's on page 9. I don't know about anybody else, but I will tell you that I took the extra pages that we got and I've stapled them on top of the, what?
That's a good idea.
Well, because it's confusing enough. But I think,
I believe the issue there is in the revenue breakdown section, the allowance for certs rolls into the amount to be raised by realty taxes and brings that number down by the $300,000 that's budgeted for that allowance. Whereas on the previous page, just the amount to be raised by taxes is we've always put in the full 58,850, and that 300 allowance for cert is rolled into the general fund total.
That's correct, Jim. That's how the property tax revenue rolls up.
but that number here and that number here both add up.
On page 8 doesn't take into account the $300,000 for the property tax. What's the $300,000 reduction, Mike? What's that for?
The tax certs.
Yeah, the tax.
Yeah.
So page 9 has the tax certs taken in because that's the summary that takes that into account, where page 8 is showing what the total levy is.
It says amount to be raised by realty taxes.
That we've historically always just put the full levy amount in and had the cert roll up into the rest of the general fund accounts.
It's a $300,000 budget line for property taxes lost due to challenges of their property taxes.
So why
They
don't
treat
we,
it as
so why
expense.
don't we have that as an expense? Why? Why don't we have that as an expense? As opposed to,
We'd have to speak to Ken about
I mean,
that.
the bottom line is you have this page winding up with this total, and that page winding up with that total, and they are using two different numbers for real property tax. So I guess I'd like an explanation of, you know, I'd like you to take a look at that.
Instead of having, I guess what you're asking is, instead of having that essentially as a negative number against the revenue, but it's within that field, it's within that field of accounts that we use via what the Office of the State Controller's Office has us use. So we have to run that by Ken and really see, but if it is a matter of moving it to an appropriate expense account for that, then I wouldn't have an issue with that.
Okay. And then with regard to what you have on page 11, the third line from the bottom, for debt service, and this is debt service on the bonds, is different than page 84, which coincidentally is also a $300,000 difference.
Here's the answer to that, and I brought this for you, all of you, to add as an insert to your book. Unfortunately, we have to do an amendment. The draft page that went into the book was not the updated page that needed to go into the book. So
For which page?
For page 84. So I do have an updated insert. If you want to pass those around. That does have the corrected number in here. It doesn't change our overall bottom line in the book because it's really just a photocopy of an incorrect page from where it says department totals up, not the actual general fund total. That's generated from our ERP system and through the Excel process putting into the book. It's simply essentially an incorrect number that was left in the book that should have been updated when we sent the updated version. But it is not driving the bottom line number. It just needs to be amended on that one, in that one section from the 15,505 to 15,205.
Where on this is that? Just try to-
Right there. In the book it says 15,5, but it should be 15,2.
Amendment 1.
And that's why.
Oh, and maybe it's my last one, too.
And that's why the other night, when you were saying the $1.4 million difference, I was like, that's not correct.
Right.
So, and then
I know.
And then I realized that was driving that number. If you had said
So-
1.8, I would have had a much clearer answer.
We're going to move on to the fire department
Can I
very
just
short.
ask- Go ahead.
Very shortly, but I keep on adding up page 10, and I come up with a $10,000 difference.
It appears that was, and I really don't want to go where many of these errors occurred. It's not really privy for the public, to be honest. But that was a number that we sent a file that the number was then hand entered into to create the graph on the bottom, and that was a transpositional error that was made that changed that caused that.
All
So we
right, so
need
what
to-
number do we need to change in the chart here?
Nick, remember which number that was?
You'll let us know.
We'll let you know. I'll go back and look, but yeah.
All right, Mr. Conti.
Yeah, just a quick question. With all these correction pages, are they being reflected on the copy of the book that's online?
We can definitely,
So is the book being, basically...
we
taken on
can,
the
we can, I mean,
revised?
is that even appropriate for
Well, if
us to do that without any sort of amendment
Well,
in place?
These
yeah.
are corrections that reflect what you guys submitted or intended to submit.
Oh, so I don't have to make that change?
I don't know that we need, well,
Can we, if we
See,
get,
we're looking at what was introduced.
yeah.
right,
So everything that we received previously that Danielle provided, those 4 pages, those are, in my opinion, legally considered
but
part of what was
after that
introduced.
is- I don't
Okay, and
think.
those were, then, the online copy reflects what was previously
We,
submitted to the clerk's office?
I mean, can we still update the website in the spirit, but still know we have to do those amendments from the legal process? So that there's what's online is actually correct?
These are technical corrections. They're all-
Right. For technical corrections?
When do we start saying it's not a technical correction? When there's salaries involved, or, I don't,
No, I just,
you know?
These
I
are
mean, because in the
clearly
past,
technical
we've done, major technical
you know, if these are
corrections.
corrections of addition or subtraction or things like that, you want to make sure that if that's what this is, those would be technical. If they're something different.
Can we let them also make the changes to everything, every heading that says, I mean, one of the things is I'm wondering, can you do this, because this is all done by a graphic designer, kind of, can you, so can we have them also change where they have at the top of the page, 2019, they meant 2020?
Yes, of course.
Mike, I just have a question too.
Sure.
Is there any mistakes or errors in the budget book that you could inform us without Judy asking you or any of your colleagues asking?
That is the goal. That is the goal. Unfortunately, this year, we did not see a completed book back to us until right at the deadline to get it to the printer. So that's a big reason as to why we're doing it this way. But generally, there are issues that come through that are not correct. So it is part of the process. We are working to lessen those each year. So that is always the goal, is bringing less and less of that into the process.
So my question is, when you find it, do
The
you
goal
share with
was
us or do
zero.
you
Oh,
take
yeah.
The
action?
goal was 0 this year.
Yeah, I think we've always been transparent about what needs to be corrected. We're not hiding it or holding it. It's just, it's a lot of stuff is
If you
something
find
that.
it, you bring it to
it's-
people's
It's a
attention.
lot of stuff that's honestly a new set of eyes, instead of old weary ones, can pick up a little easier, so.
That
You
old.
have no idea how weary my eyes are.
But it's just, it's always the goal, and, is to get to 0. And like I said, I don't want to get into the details of anything, but,
So if you could go through and let us know what you're proposing to make
Yep.
as technical corrections, then I will share that with the
Yep.
council. We'll share, Michelle.
yeah, we are
Council.
building that list and have that, and
Yeah.
I still am gonna say it's less than it's been, but we are putting that list together.
I have one other question.
Okay.
How much money did we spend to print this glossy budget book
I'd have
with
to-
all
I'd have
these
to-
errors in it?
I'd have to go back and look,
These are- That's unfair, that's unfair to Mike.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but the
These
problem
are small
seems...
technical errors, really, and that's unfair.
I'll make a suggestion right now, do similar to what the governor does, he has 30-day for changes, okay? Why don't we cut it down, we'd be in line if we did 20-day changes, 15-day changes from, so we find mistakes like this, we'd have time and we wouldn't have to worry about the, legality of it and hook pointing fingers and stuff. Why don't we
Well-
do that next year?
I did not ask for
So,
glossy
Darius,
paper for the record.
my point is, we used to get the book without all of this, and so it would be easier to change the document when it doesn't have all of this formatting. I pointed out the printed...
We can send you
The printed final
that version.
adopted budget book for 2019 had some discrepancies between what they had as the summary page
That's
and
fine.
what we adopted.
You find them, you fix them,
Well,
and they've worked
but it
they've
took-
worked very hard to put together a nice budget book that everyone can see, that's very well presented, and they worked very hard on this.
No
I'm
one's saying anything about that.
I think it's more about, it's less about the content and more about the expense of the,
It was not significantly more expensive than previous books have been. But I did not specifically ask for the glossy pages, but it was.
My concern again is that when I pointed out the discrepancy between what we adopted and what was, we actually received as the adopted book, in the adopted book, that it took over a month, maybe 8 weeks, for the graphic designer then to get those changes in a format that you could then provide to us. The changes that go on when you take this book and you then need to make a lot of changes when we've made, those adjustments also result in us getting the final adopted book, I think, in June.
No, we had the books in April. I don't know what happened, why you guys didn't get them.
Oh, that's right.
But,
That's right.
but the difference is now the graphic designer did give us the actual file. So we can go ahead and make all the changes ourselves.
Okay.
Without having to wait on anybody else. And that's something we can repeat going forward till next year, where we can update right to the last second ourselves before it goes to the printer, so we know that what our updated sheets are actually getting into the book. So it's all going to be in-house and just us doing it and making sure that these errors are being eliminated before they go out.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. Howie?
Speaking of the book, I don't see a union bug anywhere. I mean, we discovered that there is legislation that anything printed by the city should be done by unionized printers. So I don't see it. Maybe it's there. I didn't see it.
Okay. I can talk to the mayor's office about that, because they're the ones who handled the printing.
All right.
Once you have this, your budget's not going to differentiate much from it format-wise. This can almost be a boilerplate that your staff could update as you get through the department. Rather than send it out to
The problem was we needed to get the file from the graphic designer to be able to do that, and now we have that file to just make those changes
It's on the
ourselves.
same computer system.
Yeah, it's an InDesign program. It's a very popular graphic design program. I believe Brian already has it, and we can get it through our IT as well. So we'll be doing all the changes in-house. It'll be, as quickly, definitely as quick of a turnaround as we can do. So that's a difference.
thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen. All right. Fire Department,
You want those?
Chief Gregory and Company.
Pass them on.
There's another mistake. I'll take 68. Your pictures are here.
It's this one here, retirement. Should be 14158, I believe. I can send it to you.
Retirement 1-4.
I believe 158. After this, I'll email you what the actual, but I know it's that one there.
Okay. A PowerPoint presentation, great.
Presentation.
All right, is everybody ready? Let's get that equipment on and let's get rolling.
Popcorn.
I'll bring it.
You want to see? You want to go see? I got all the heads.
He's going.
Well, while Nick is preparing our PowerPoint, again, introduce myself. I'm Joe Gregory. I'm the chief of your fire department.
Oh, I
And
apologize for
tonight, I will, along with our chief fiscal officer, Nick Riley, be presenting our proposed 2020 budget. Joining us tonight is our two deputy chiefs, Deputy Chief Craig Wickham and Deputy Chief Dave Newton, who are here for some additional support for us, as well as we have some members of our fire department here, Firefighter Ed Bierhoff and Lieutenant Dana Lilly, who are representing our union tonight. So we'll talk initially, I'll give a quick narrative about our goals and initiatives for 2020. Basically, what we're doing as the fire department is focusing on making progress in the following areas. Our fleet maintenance program. We've initiated the MTC Pro Web program, which is a maintenance program that allows our mechanics, our fleet services unit to monitor the daily maintenance of our apparatus. What we're trying to do is to have more preventive maintenance schedules, keep track of more on the costs, whether it be to show a better need to whether we want to do in-house repairs or whether we need to farm it out to an outside vendor. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what the fleet maintenance program is all about, our FTC program, or MTC program, I'm sorry. And it's something that is used in other agencies in the city also. So we know that it's a proven program, and we are glad to be on board with that. The second part we talk about is our training initiatives and our safety programs. We're putting a big emphasis on safety and training again this year. We're doing aggressive grant research. We're strengthening our relationship with our community partners. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the program. But some of the folks that we're working with are the Port of Albany, and that works along with the, who in turn are partners with the Coast Guard. And that offers up some grant opportunities for us through the port security grants. We're also doing some initiatives with the Police and Fire Foundation, which has just reformatted their program, and they're working with both us and the Albany Police Department to in fundraising efforts to provide safety equipment for our firefighters. And we also work in conjunction with the Renaissance Corporation, who's been providing some funds for our department to allow us to purchase some needed equipment. And then the last two sections, we talk about our recruitment program. As you know, we were pretty successful with our recruitment program along, and I know that's a major issue in our initiative here. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. And last but not least, the revenue recovery. We're trying to continue exploring our options for revenue recovery for the fire service, to bring in revenue to the department. It's a tough task because there's not a lot that we can go and bill for. So we're looking at alternative ways. At a recent conference that we attended, there was a section on cost-effective ways of disposing apparatus and better ways to do it than the current way that is done here in the city. So Nick and I are exploring that option with our legal department to see if it's a prudent way for us. Our initiatives. Our improvements to training and improving our EMS documentation. That's one of the areas that we can look to bring in some additional revenue. We're able to bill for, through Mohawk Angles, we're able to bill for advanced life support service, which we are the sole provider for here in the city. So through our increased documentation and our better documentation of our services that we provide to our citizens and visitors, we're able to tend to bring in more revenue through our improved documentation process. We talk about our leadership training for officer onboarding. It's something that we're looking into now for the future. We have a fairly young department, so we're bringing up on board a lot of new officers. Through retirements, we're elevating a lot of members, and we're finding that it's going to help us to increase safety. It's going to help us to increase accountability by training our officers. They do go through a program through the New York City Fire Department First Line Supervisor Training Program. However, we want to build on that and not only for our current officers, but also for our future officers that are on the promotion list, to bring them up to speed and to bring them in, again, for safety of our members and for the accountability of our services. And that ties into the workplace safety it's that through our the new equipment that we're being able to purchase through some of our benefactors and through our grant funding. So that's where our workplace safety comes in. Now, I know recruitment is a major thing for our department. It's a major issue for fire departments throughout the country, but we feel that we are making a good concerted effort. We're looking to, again, make our department more representative of our community. So we know that it's a new age. We're targeting social media. We're trying to revamp our system. We found that part of it worked, but there was a bit of a disconnect. So we're trying to utilize our community partners more. We're working with the College of St. Rose with their communications division and their business school to build a business model program for our department that hopefully, if it's successful in our department, through an internship program, we can move on to to help other agencies within our city to build on our recruitment efforts. And that's something that we did during our recruitment efforts, or we talked about in our recruitment efforts a few years ago. And now this is finally coming to fruition. Working with the College of St. Rose, I think, will be a huge benefit for us. We're also working with our youth and workforce nonprofits. So this is our goal: is to target that diverse target that diverse application pool that we have. That's our goal. And then last but not least, there's one other initiative that we didn't put up on the board, but it's something that's most recently developed. We're working on a community liaison program. We know we've had some major fires in our area, and we found that in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20. We looked at our operation. We found that we do a great job in the firefighting efforts, and then we do a great job after the fact in dealing with the public and hoping that we can help them in any way that the fire department can, and through our fire investigation and our fire prevention program. But it's that middle ground that we found that was lacking. So what we're trying to do is we're working with ACDA and our Buildings and Codes Department to build that bridge at the fire scene so that once our fire investigators are there, they can take the information from the affected folks, the victims of the fire, and then continue to serve them by bringing them to a member of our liaison program, and then bring them to an area and keep them together so that we can continue to fulfill their needs, find out if there's anyone we need to talk to, what information that they need from their house, any medications that we can retrieve, where they're located in the house. So we want to constantly keep in contact with them. And we think this is an innovative program. We don't know of it of any fire department in the area. So this is something that we're really moving towards. And we hope that this will be beneficial to the community. We definitely feel it will be beneficial to the community members. And I think it'll be a better recognition factor for our department too, for something that we're out there being very proactive. So we're pretty excited about that.
Is that a grant funded program or?
No, this is just something that we're putting together just with city agencies, and then as we need, we're just in the developing stages right now. We're going to sit down and meet with a small group, try to focus on what our needs are, and then start to pull in the different groups that will need. For example, Red Cross, Salvation Army, any other community groups that may need to participate. That we feel that can be a benefit to any fire victims at that scene. So we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot over the last few years. So we're trying to rather than just we acknowledge that this was an issue and just say we'll move on to the next one. We want to build on that and grow and try and bridge that gap that we found was that missing link. So we're hoping that that's going to be a good project.
I've been to some fires in my ward where I was just last year across the street from my son's house, and the important part, those people are just, they're panicked. They don't know what to do. I mean, I was fortunate enough to know old ladies and get talking to them and this and that, calming down, but you know what to do.
Well, that's it. That's our goal, is to basically provide direction for them at the scene. And we're trying to figure out, our fire department, we have limited staff, and, they're dedicated to fire extinguishment, fire investigation, but we know that there are other resources within the city that we can work with. So we want to take the lead on this and move this forward. And again, build that gap. Everyone needs direction, and in that time of need, they are panicking. They need to have someone there that can at least guide them through a process. So that's our goal with that. So we hope it works. We hope it's successful. We feel it will be successful. So. We'll talk a little bit about our revenues. I guess I could just start off and talk about, we've been somewhat successful in achieving some very limited grants for the fire service out there. There's some FEMA grants, and we were lucky enough to be awarded an AFP grant, Assistance to Firefighter grant, for a vehicle exhaust system. And it's something that's needed in our firehouse. The present system that we had was close to 20 years old. The system was great, the system worked okay, but with the new apparatus burning hotter, burning longer, we knew that this is something that was needed. It's a big boost in our cancer initiative. We know that that's a major problem with the fire service, so this is going to be a huge impact. Hopefully it will be a huge impact on our fire service.
Can you just explain that? That's not the hoses?
It's the hoses that put in the house. Yes.
So it's going to be for every fire?
Yes, the whole fire, and the project should be completed by mid next week. So, and it was about $330,000 grant that we received.
$330,000, we paid we got a grant for $306,000 with a 10% match, so we paid $30,000.
And then thermal imaging cameras on all apparatus. This is something, again, that's moving Albany forward as a leader in the fire service area here in the capital region. And throughout the state and country, we received some money from some benefactors to provide thermal imaging cameras, not only for each piece of apparatus, but also for each riding position. So we're very excited about that, and we caught it at a good price point. So we were able to work that out, and we're working on training now. We're meeting with the company tomorrow to do some additional training for our staff, and then we'll be rolling those thermal imagers out to the companies.
So for our proposed revenues for 2020, there's one thing here I want to point out. This was part of the department's request. This amount should be $525,000. That's what it was moved to for the proposed budget. Largely in part due to all of our current projections for 2019 are in line with where we were at in 2018. The EMS ambulance revenues is almost on point to finish at around $485,000 to $490,000. Largely in part, that's due to a high percentage, about 62% of our EMS calls are reimbursed through Medicare and Medicaid. And while that's the case, the reimbursement levels that we receive from that are not as high as if it was private insurance. So $595, we decided was a little bit aggressive. So we're lowering that down to $525. In the budget book, it says $525. That's private insurance. Presentation still says $595. Our reimbursement rate for special events and details is still the same. We're keeping that at $125. We're on pace to exceed that slightly. And then for the New York State Department of Health, we are going to meet with the state to get some training and documentation. We're hoping that can help us keep up to date on current events and also improve our documentation tracking, recording, and submissions. So for our operating budget, our year-to-date performance, our overtime is higher than we anticipated. We have been sending our quarterly reports on what our staffing levels are and our quarterly overtime is to Richard County and the council. Something I'd like to point out that's unique about the situation is our vacancy numbers aren't uncharacteristically low. We started out this year with a lot of firefighters who were on long-term sick. We had firefighters at paramedic school. We had firefighters who were on light duty and couldn't work on their given apparatus for the day. And because of that, we were required to obviously fill their shifts and staff our engines and ladders. And because of that, we had to call in overtime. So our overtime number is up due to that reason and not entirely due to just being down 9 firefighters. The other thing, too, we mentioned with that is we hired class February 1st. And even though we hired 14 people, that we were fully trained and in service until I believe June. So that in part is why overtime is high. And it's also, because of the reasons behind that, it's also important why we continually invest in workplace safety and training is to try to minimize the number of firefighters that we do have on light duty. Another point to bring up is we've had 5 firefighters this year come off of the disability retirement plan due to reaching the maximum age. So that amount has gone down. We've seen some budget savings from that. And again, the department has been fiscally responsible in terms of managing their contractual expenditures. They're projected to spend about 6% below their budgeted amount.
That's overall 6% for the year you're
Well,
projecting?
so what their actual expenses are projected to finish the year at would be 6% below what the budgeted amount is.
Including the overtime?
No, this is just contractual. So like
I'm sorry.
contracted services, things that they can.
I'm sorry.
Equipment, things like that. Large part of that is actually, we'll get into in the capital budget, was using old bond funds.
Do we have that slide that shows more like this? Yeah.
This one?
No, the previous one.
This one? Yeah. It's in your, like, this one is in the book. So this one is our year-to-date performance. What I can do is I can send it probably to Michelle, maybe the best person.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
send
it's in the, you guys' presentation,
Oh, this is
the PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, yeah, because you can, I printed it out with 3 slides. Wow.